This month, the Port of Los Angeles announced they moved over 10 million TEUs, 10 million containers in the Port of Los Angeles over the last fiscal year. And last month, they topped over 1 million containers moved. That is record breaking for a port in the Western Hemisphere. On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, we're going to be talking about Los Angeles, Yantian, and the FMC, the Federal Maritime Commission. I'm Sal Mercogliano, former merchant mariner, associate professor of history at Campbell University, and an instructor in maritime industry policy at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. So a lot to unpack here. And what I want to do is talk about some stories that came across the news the past week and really put them together to you so you understand what's going on with global logistics, particularly as it impacts the United States. So here's the story by Mike Scholler, came out on June 10th. Port of Los Angeles processes record 10 million TEUs for new Western Hemisphere record. Absolutely phenomenal numbers, never seen before, besting the previous numbers that we've seen in the port. In April, they moved 946,000 containers. But here we see this jump. Add to it 5 days later, this story comes out, 1 million TEUs in 1 month. Port of Los Angeles sets new Western Hemisphere cargo record. So there's that 74% jump compared to this time last year, May of 2020. Now, I understand May of 2020 is in the midst of COVID. A lot of decrease of trade going on right there. And this is the 10th consecutive month of year-over-year increases for them. And it puts them on track to do another 10 million TEU year. Now, to put this in the context, but this is the numbers of the top 10 ports last year in 2020. And one of the things you'll see here is that there are a lot of ports out there that move more containers than Los Angeles. So Shanghai moved 43.5, Singapore 36.87 million, and you go down that list: Ningbo, Shenzhen, Zhengzhou, Tsingtao, Busan, which is in Korea, Singapore, obviously in Singapore, Tianjin, Hong Kong, and then Rotterdam. So of the top 10, 7 of them are in China, one's in Singapore, one's in Korea, and one is in the Netherlands. But none of them are over 10 million. Now, understand that does not include Long Beach either. If you combine Los Angeles and Long Beach, the ports are right next to each other. Then you have a larger port right there. But Long Beach does other things besides containers. I want to go over to the video that was done by the Port of Los Angeles. This is their video right here. I'm going to play part of their video because I want you to hear what the head of the port has to say. So I'm going to start it off here. Let me get some music right here.
I just received our May numbers from staff, and I'm so pleased to report that for the first time ever, in the month of May, the Port of Los Angeles moved over 1 million TEUs.
So Gene's in there saying he'd just been handed that paperwork. I always love those things. I'm pretty sure he wasn't just handed the paperwork and had a camera set up ready to roll. But anyway, great news, big announcement, tremendous achievement by the Port of Los Angeles.
And that's just on the heels of celebrating last week's accomplishment of 10 million TEUs for the fiscal year ending on June 30th. Our longshore labor shifts are up 20% versus the 3-year average. And our vessel productivity is up 50%, all during this surge as we've grappled with COVID-19. On the import side of the business, we moved more than 535,000 TEUs. Empty repositioning continues to be very strong, with more than 366,000 container units repoed back to Asia. But our trade gap has widened now to 4.9 to 1. That's the widest import to export gap that we have seen in our time. We continue to chip away at...
Okay, that number right there is the key, 4.9 to 1. So in other words, there are almost 5 containers coming in with loaded goods into the Port of Los Angeles, but only 1 container with exports heading out, which means where's the delta? What's the difference right there? And if you listen to him say it before, he's talking about repositioning empties. In other words, empty containers to the tune of 3.5 times more than loaded containers are sailing out of Los Angeles. And that is an issue. The issue here is the movement of these empty containers in this story, which I think is very key. That means American exports are not getting out of the country. It's creating a massive trade deficit as more and more imports come in. I'm going to let this play to the end here.
Container dwell times and increasing velocity, looking much better on terminal and on street, but we still have a lot of work to do with our rail product. And I know both Western Railroad partners are working around the clock to get this managed.
So that deal with the railroad partners, Union Pacific, for example, is in Central Pacific, big ones that are involved here. Obviously, the trains not being able to move out of the yard are key. And we've already seen reports coming from some of the rail companies about increased delays going all the way through November, as a matter of fact. And in another report by the Port of Los Angeles, they talked about the fact that we're talking about really long lay times for cargo to get on board trains.
With the successive vessel calls trying to get the engine power, assets, and crews back to Los Angeles quick enough is a daunting task. I just testified in front of Congress to explain what our supply chain looks like today and how to improve it.
That congressional testimony is going to be really the subject we're going to talk about here as we talk about both the Port of Los Angeles, what's going on in China right now, and the Federal Maritime Commission.
We're watching very closely with the outbreak of COVID-19 in Yantian, where South China ports around the Pearl River Delta are operating right now at about 50% of capacity.
Okay, a little tidbit information. I did a video about a ship power sliding into Taiwan, and I inadvertently said Malaysia, and I got a lot of flack for that, which I deserve. I got it wrong. I initially said that it was the port of Malaysia when it was the port of Taiwan. I am a one-person operation here. This is the port of Los Angeles. That's not the port of Yantian. That is the port of Yantian, all the way up in northern China. So again, just a little tidbit of information there. Again, always kind of check things before you do it, especially if you're the port of Los Angeles.
1/3 of all our vessel sailings on the inbound side emanate from South China, so this is an important market for us to continue to watch. But with all of this news and our ongoing investment in digitization with the Port Optimizer, it truly is time to say thank you. Thank you to all the dock workers, port workers across the region, our import-export community, and our service providers for the outstanding work to get to 1 million TEUs in the month of May. Thank you.
I want to include that last part because I think that's true. There's a lot of credit needs to be conveyed to all the dock workers and everybody associated with moving those containers. It is not an easy process. So let's talk about the opposite end of this equation, which is over in China right now, over in southern China, Yantian, which is the port right here. China's worse than the Suez ship delays set to widen trade crisis. So this came out on June 17th, from Bloomberg. And they're talking about how this delay is going to have ramifications. We're seeing 600,000 to 800,000 boxes affected so far by this. You see right here, the trend is worrying and increasing congestion is becoming a global problem. That comes from Maersk. Now, I'm always take for a grain of salt everything Maersk says, because usually that is something that benefits them. For them to say something publicly, that usually means that it's going to benefit them, which usually means that their freight rates are going to go up. And as you see here, estimated congestion in Yantian will take 6 to 8 weeks to clear. And again, we're seeing that not just in the maritime trade journals, but also it's starting to break a little bit more into some mainstream sources. Here, Lorianne LaRocco, if you don't follow anyone, Lorianne's always great to follow. Satellite imagery shows backlog of containers awaiting export at the port of Yantian. Here's the port. That is the port. That's the correct port. And you see ships lined up. You will usually always see ships lined up like this. Let me be clear. But the issue here we know is the ships off in the anchorage. If you look at marine traffic and you look at the Port of Los Angeles, not as many ships off the Port of Los Angeles right now. It's actually decreasing quite a bit. But on the flip side, over in China, we're seeing increased delays. We're seeing ships at anchor waiting to come out. It's akin to driving down a highway and all of a sudden traffic slows down for no explained reason and then picks back up again. And that's what we're seeing happen right here. Now, what's being done to kind of offset that? Well, there are plans afoot to expand some West Coast ports. Up in Seattle, we see the arrival. This is a story from Maritime Executive the other day. This is June 18th. Seattle receives giant container cranes preparing for T5. This is Terminal 5 reopening. This is a heavy lift ship, and these 5 cranes are mounted on deck and then sailed across the Pacific like that. That ship sails across the Pacific exactly like that. It is a huge amount of weight, very high up. So you have to take a very careful crossing. You need calm weather to do this, obviously. These cranes will be offloaded, and they're going over here to a terminal that shut down a few years ago. This is the backside of the ship coming in. But this port terminal shut down a few years ago. It was limited to about 6,000 TEU ships. Now they'll be able to handle much larger ships. And this sounds great. This opens up the port of Seattle even more. The issue with Seattle is not so much the container terminals, it is the infrastructure to get in and out of the terminal. And that's one of the big issues that we see happening right there. So this is the vessel again. I just think it's an amazing photo when you see this. Let's talk about the impact now of LA handling extra containers, Yantian having the slowdown, spreading across South China ports. This is a story in American Shipper, June 17th. Vessel group rejects allegations of threats against U.S. exporters. Fear of retaliation for complaining about high seas and canceled contracts unjustified, the World Shipping Council asserts. Now, the World Shipping Council, which sounds like an evil villain group that you would hear in a Marvel movie, or Dr. Evil, it's not. It's a consortium of shipping companies, and this is the site for it right here. This is their website, the worldshipping.org. It's an interesting site. It's also very outdated. There's some information on here that's really old, so I don't know what's up to date here or not. But one of the things I want to show you are the board members of the World Shipping Council. So right here, and I'm not sure if the names are right, but look at the companies: ONE, Japanese; Hapag-Lloyd, German; HMM, that is a Korean firm right there. Wanhai, that is Taiwanese. Yangmin, also Taiwanese. AP Moller, that's Danish. Matson and Crowley, those are the only U.S. groups on here. Zim, that is Israeli. Express Feeder, Singapore. Evergreen, Taiwan. Independent Container Line, it's a very small consortium. They have a headquarters in the U.S., but they're actually Belgian. A firm, Wallenius, which is German. CMA, CGM, that's French. MSC, that is Swiss. And OOCL and Costco, that is China, People's Republic of China. So you can see that overwhelmingly, these are foreign shipping companies that are on the World Shipping Council. And what you have here is a argument going on here. U.S. exporters should not fear payback from container lines if they complain to the FMC, the Federal Maritime Commission, about excessive cargo fees or canceled contracts, according to the carrier's representative in Washington. This is John Butler, the president CEO of the World Shipping Council. I categorically reject the idea that shippers are being threatened with retaliation for bringing complaints. That is the statement he said before the committee on Tuesday this week. But earlier in the hearing, one of the commissioners of the FMC, now the FMC is the Federal Maritime Commission. Quick little bit of history. In 1961, under reorganization plan number 7, the Maritime Administration and the Federal Maritime Commission, which were all under a maritime administrator under the Secretary of Commerce. And actually, that person was a subcabinet level. So it was a deputy or an assistant secretary who oversaw that. In 1961, the decision was made to split those two off, split them in half. The Maritime Commission Maritime Administration goes over to Secretary of Transportation. It's downgraded. It's just an administrator that reports to the secretary through the deputy. And the Maritime Administration is responsible for promoting the American Merchant Marine. The Federal Maritime Commission is meant to protect shippers. And when I say shippers, I mean those who are shipping cargo. It's a little confusing. Carriers are the shipping lines. Shippers are those shipping the cargo. And so you split it, which in 1961 made sense because of the style of cargo at the time. But today, with containerization, which really was introduced in 1958, this is a backward system, I would say. I think we need to scrap that, put the two back together, the Maritime Administration and the FMC, and again, elevate it up to a sub-cabinet level, almost a sub-cabinet level for marine affairs. And because right here you see this, Rebecca Dye, who's one of the 5 commissioners, and I think does a fantastic job, said her agency has been self-initiating complaints against carriers due to a lack of complaints filed directly from the exporters. FMC is basically doing these investigations on behalf of these shippers because the shippers don't want to come forward. She says this: "We didn't get as many complaints as we wanted." I'm not sure I would say wanted, because our exporters are concerned about retaliation. I can assure you that this is a violation of the Shipping Act, and we would take prompt and decisive action if we heard about any carrier actually retaliating against any exporter or any other supply chain actor for coming to the FMC with a complaint. Go down here a little further. Alexis Jacobson, who is testifying on behalf of the U.S. Exporters Group Agricultural Transportation Coalition, said that the carrying terminals have been routinely imposing excessive demurrage and detention charges of $175 to $750 per container per day. So, demurrage. If you are late in arriving or shipping cargo, you get paid a fine, basically. And what's happening here is exporters, U.S. exporters, are sending their material to terminals to ship out. The companies, the shipping companies, are bumping their cargo to take empty containers, leaving American exports on the dock, and then American exporters are getting paid fees to keep their containers in the terminal because they're taking up room. And so this is the situation that we're facing right now. There's a follow-up story here. Congress drafting law barring ocean carriers from refusing exporting U.S. exports. Is a bipartisan bill. John Garamendi, Democrat from California, Dusty Johnson, Republican from South Dakota, have filed this to amend the U.S. Shipping Act, which is the U.S. Shipping Act of 1984, which by 1984, we saw the decline of U.S. shipping companies and much more reliance on these foreign shipping companies. Again, I could put up the chart here showing you how 10 shipping companies control 85% of all the container space on the world's oceans. And 9 of those 10 are in alliances where if you anger one, you anger the other ones in the group. So here's what they're asking for: prohibiting ocean carriers from declining all cargo bookings for exports. That has to be better defined, because if an exporter just wants to pay $1 to export, that's not fair. You have to make it, fair market price. Rebuilding ocean carriers, requiring ocean carriers to include a statement of compliance, requiring the FMC to post publicly on all websites all findings of false certifications by ocean carriers, basically be more transparent. Establishing ongoing duty responsibilities for the FMC to ensure export opportunities for U.S. exporters and promote reciprocal trade. The problem with this is this investigation has been going on for a year. A year this has been going on, and we're still having this issue develop right now. We're still seeing this happen right here. And again, one of the things you see here is some of the details here. Demand for imports in the U.S. has caused freight charges to surge up to $10,000 to $12,000. By comparison, export container loads are earning carriers just $400 to $1,800 in freight charges. And so what's happening is the carriers want those empty containers shipped back to the Far East. And instead of going off to be discharged and then go to a loading facility, they just want to send them right to the loading facility because they can turn those containers around because of the container shortage we talked about. This is all coming in here. The National Pork Producers Council President Jen Sorensen testified that an average of 22% of agricultural export sales are going unexecuted due to the lack of export container capacity. So all of this is going on. We jump over to this story here where Congress is discussing these forced liners to accept U.S. exports. Same kind of story here. I just want to come down here for a minute, because you see this FMC chairman, Daniel Maffei, I think it is, was quizzed on the issue yesterday. I think we should discuss the specific provisions to make sure there's no unintended consequences. I would also say we can't just scapegoat the carriers. There are good eggs and bad eggs in all these baskets. Okay. Maffei was a former congressman. He's a politician, and that's as political an answer as you can imagine right here. But the issue here is more than that. A letter signed by more than 100 members of Congress in March this year called on the chair of the FMC to act quickly to stem the tide of empty containers. So this needs to be rectified. We need to get this. And it goes on a little bit further here. The White House announced last week the creation of a supply chain distribution task force. This is the announcement here at Splash 24/7. Where they're calling about this, announced the appointment of Karen Gregory as the organization's regulatory reform officer. Basically, in her new role, she'll set up a regulatory reform task force with a remit of identifying unnecessary or outdated directives. And then they're trying to get basically concerned parties involved: shippers, carriers, perhaps a former merchant mariner who's an associate professor of history can be called upon to provide some guidance. Who knows? But here you see efforts being done. The problem is this is slow, this is glacial. Global trade is fast, dynamic, and unfortunately, global regulations and national regulations don't tend to keep up. By the time anything is imposed here, this is going to pass and a new issue will be coming up. And unfortunately, because of the overdependence we have on foreign shippers to move our goods, or foreign carriers, excuse me, to move our goods, we're much more susceptible to having our exports held on the dock and the priority being given to the shippers, to the empty containers. So if you're interested in some more background material, I'll have all this information, all these links in the show notes. Also, I will include this from the Congressional Research Service, two information things they did. One's on the Federal Maritime Commission. So if you want to see what the Federal Maritime Commission does, its background, what it basically does, and how it's organized, a quick little 2-page summary of that. And then in January of this year, they put together this on the Maritime Administration on shipping and shipbuilding support programs. But it does include in here information on the Maritime Administration and what it does. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, if you have the opportunity, please take some time, go ahead, subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up. Also, be sure to hit the bell so you're alerted about new videos as they come out. And until our next episode of What's Going On with Shipping, this is Sal signing off.